Number 1. Robert Stewart, the Carthage Nursing Home Massacre. Robert Kenneth Stewart entered the Pine Lake Health and Rehab Center in Carthage, North Carolina, on the morning of March 29, 2009, carrying with him the weight of 83 years of resentment, failed relationships, and a deteriorating mental state that had reached its devastating breaking point, culminating in one of the most horrific mass shootings perpetrated by an elderly individual in American history. Born in 1925 and raised during the Great Depression, Stewart had worked as a skilled craftsman and private investigator throughout his adult life, developing a reputation as a meticulous but increasingly paranoid man whose 3 marriages had all ended in bitter divorce proceedings marked by accusations of domestic abuse and controlling behavior. His most recent divorce from Wanda Gay Stewart had left him emotionally fractured, as he became obsessed with the belief that his ex-wife had been unfaithful and was hiding from him within the nursing facility where she worked as a nursing assistant, despite having no evidence to support this delusion. On that Sunday morning, Stewart armed himself with a .357 Magnum, a .22 caliber pistol, a 12-gauge Winchester pump-action shotgun, and a .22 caliber rifle, driving the short distance from his modest home to the nursing home with the specific intent of locating and killing Wanda Gay. Upon entering the facility through the front doors, he immediately encountered Nurse Jerry Avent, demanding to know his ex-wife's location, and when Avent replied that she was not working that day, Stewart executed him with a single gunshot to the head before beginning a systematic rampage through the hallways. He moved methodically through the common areas and patient rooms, killing 7 additional victims including 76-year-old Tessie Garner, 88-year-old John Goldsberry, 82-year-old Margaret Johnson, and 78-year-old Bessie Hedrick, among others, while injuring 3 additional residents and staff members including Sheriff's Corporal Justin Garner, who heroically confronted Stewart in a hallway and exchanged gunfire before subduing the elderly gunman despite being wounded. The investigation revealed that Stewart had told multiple acquaintances in the weeks prior that he intended to kill his ex-wife and then himself, and had even prepared a letter confessing his intentions and distributing his assets, though he never completed the suicide portion of his plan after being wounded in the shootout with Corporal Garner. During the trial proceedings that began in 2011, Stewart's defense team argued that he suffered from severe depression and diminished capacity, compounded by his advanced age, presenting evidence that he was taking 17 different medications for various physical and mental ailments, including anxiety disorders and chronic pain conditions that had severely impaired his judgment. However, prosecutors successfully countered these arguments by demonstrating that Stewart's actions were premeditated and calculated, pointing to his careful weapon selection, strategic positioning throughout the facility, and the specific targeting of certain individuals while bypassing others, indicating clear awareness and deliberation rather than an impulsive act of senility. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a verdict on February 26, 2011, finding Stewart guilty on 8 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree attempted murder for the shooting of Corporal Garner, and multiple weapons charges, rejecting the defense's insanity pleas and recommendations for mercy based on his age. Stewart was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, effectively ensuring he would die within the North Carolina prison system, which he did on May 10, 2017, at Central Prison in Raleigh at the age of 92, having spent his final years in a medical unit due to declining health conditions including dementia and congestive heart failure. The case prompted significant scrutiny regarding domestic violence among elderly populations, the security protocols at healthcare facilities, and the challenges of predicting violent behavior in seniors, while permanently scarring the Carthage community and leading to enhanced security measures at nursing homes statewide. Though for the families of the 8 victims, no systemic changes could compensate for the loss of their loved ones killed by a man who chose to vent his domestic rage upon the most vulnerable members of society. Number 2. Anthony Richetard, the octogenarian hammer murderer. Anthony Richetard was 80 years old when he committed a crime of such brutal violence against his own wife in their Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania home that it shattered the community's perception of elderly domestic partnerships and revealed the terrifying reality that advanced age does not diminish the capacity for savage murder, particularly in cases of long-term domestic abuse that go unaddressed for decades. Married to Sandra Richetard for over 50 years, Anthony had established a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior throughout their marriage, though he had no prior criminal record, managing to conceal his violent tendencies behind the facade of a retired blue-collar worker and devoted husband as he aged into his 8th decade. On August 23, 2018, following an argument regarding Sandra's medical care and his growing concerns about being placed in a nursing facility himself, Richetard retrieved a framing hammer from his garage and proceeded to bludgeon his 73-year-old wife repeatedly in the skull, crushing her cranium with such force that fragments of bone became embedded in the weapon's striking surface, before retrieving a kitchen knife and stabbing her multiple times in the chest and abdomen to ensure she could not survive the attack. The crime scene, discovered the following morning when concerned neighbors noticed the couple's mail accumulating and lights remaining on throughout the night, presented investigators with a horrifying tableau of blood spatter extending from the master bedroom to the hallway, indicating that Sandra had attempted to flee her husband's assault before collapsing from her injuries, while Anthony sat in his recliner in the living room, covered in dried blood, having attempted to clean himself but making no effort to contact emergency services during the intervening 18 hours. During interrogation, Richetard initially claimed that his wife had fallen and injured herself, then changed his story to suggest an intruder had attacked them both, before finally confessing that he had killed Sandra because he could no longer care for her and refused to be institutionalized, viewing murder as a preferable alternative to separation or assisted living arrangements. The Allegheny County Medical Examiner determined that Sandra had suffered 12 distinct skull fractures and 7 stab wounds, classifying the manner of death as homicide with the hammer blows being the fatal injuries while the stab wounds represented overkill consistent with rage or desperation. At trial, the prosecution presented testimony from the Richetards' adult children, who revealed that their father had always been emotionally abusive and controlling, becoming increasingly paranoid and aggressive in his later years as dementia began affecting his frontal lobe, though mental health experts disagreed on whether he possessed the cognitive capacity to understand the wrongfulness of his actions at the time of the killing. The defense argued for a conviction of voluntary manslaughter based on diminished capacity and extreme emotional disturbance, suggesting that Anthony's advanced age, failing health, and fear of abandonment had created a temporary break from reality that led to the violent outburst. On March 15, 2019, the jury rejected these arguments and convicted Richetard of first-degree murder, with the judge imposing a sentence of life in prison without parole, noting that the brutality of the hammer attack demonstrated clear premeditation and malice regardless of the defendant's age or claimed cognitive decline. Richetard was transported to State Correctional Institution Phoenix in Montgomery County, where he remains confined to the geriatric unit, his case serving as a grim reminder to social workers and elder care advocates that domestic violence does not dissipate with age but rather can intensify as couples face the stresses of retirement, health decline, and changing living arrangements, while Sandra Richetard's death highlighted the particular vulnerability of elderly women in long-term abusive marriages where isolation and shame prevent them from seeking help. Number 3. Okey Payne, the 95-year-old shooter. Okey Payne became one of the oldest murder defendants in American legal history when, at the age of 95, he shot and killed his 44-year-old caregiver Claudia Villalpando in the early morning hours of March 11, 2011, at the Magnolia Manor Assisted Living Facility in Colorado, where he resided despite maintaining a level of independence that allowed him to retain a 12-gauge shotgun in his room contrary to facility policy. A World War II veteran who had served in the Pacific Theater and returned home to work as a mechanic and rancher, Payne had developed a reputation as a fiercely independent and increasingly paranoid centenarian, who viewed the assistance offered by facility staff as interference and suspected his caregivers of stealing from him, particularly targeting Ms. Villalpando, a mother of 4 who had worked at Magnolia Manor for 8 years and was known for her compassionate treatment of difficult residents. The conflict between Payne and Villalpando had escalated over several months as Payne repeatedly accused her of taking his belongings, including sentimental items from his military service and cash he kept in his room. Complaints that facility administrators investigated and found to be unsubstantiated, but failed to adequately document or address through increased supervision or mental health intervention. On the morning of the shooting, Villalpando entered Payne's room to assist him with his morning routine and medication, at which point Payne retrieved the shotgun he had hidden behind his dresser and fired a single blast into her chest at close range, killing her instantly before calmly sitting on his bed and waiting for staff members who heard the shot to arrive and disarm him. The investigation revealed that Payne had told at least 3 other residents in the days prior that he intended to kill Villalpando and would not be taken advantage of any longer, statements that were dismissed by staff as the ramblings of a confused old man rather than serious threats requiring intervention. During competency hearings that spanned nearly 2 years due to Payne's advanced age and deteriorating physical condition, including hearing loss, vision impairment, and early-stage dementia, mental health experts were divided on whether he possessed the requisite mental capacity to understand the legal proceedings against him, with several neurologists testifying that his age-related cognitive decline prevented him from forming the specific intent required for a murder conviction. Ultimately, the court found Payne incompetent to stand trial in 2013, ordering him committed to the Colorado State Mental Health Institute, where he remained until his death on December 28, 2016, at the age of 100, having never faced formal conviction for Villalpando's murder, but remaining civilly confined until his natural death. The case generated significant controversy regarding the intersection of elder care and public safety, with Villalpando's family filing a wrongful death lawsuit against Magnolia Manor for negligent supervision and failure to remove firearms from Payne's possession despite his documented paranoia and violent threats, resulting in a confidential settlement and policy changes regarding weapon searches in assisted living facilities statewide. Legal scholars continue to debate whether the competency standards for elderly defendants require modification, as Payne's case illustrated the difficulty of achieving justice for victims when perpetrators evade trial due to age-related infirmities, while the tragedy serves as a stark reminder that the elderly can pose significant lethal threats even in institutional settings designed to provide care and safety for vulnerable populations. Number 4. John Emil List, the family annihilator who hid for 18 years. John Emil List committed one of the most methodical and cold-blooded family annihilations in American history on November 9, 1971, when he murdered his 46-year-old wife Helen, his 84-year-old mother Alma, and his 3 children, 16-year-old Patricia, 15-year-old John Frederick, and 13-year-old Frederick, at their spacious Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, before vanishing and establishing a new identity that allowed him to evade capture for nearly 2 decades until his past finally caught up with him in 1989. Born in 1925 to a strict Lutheran family, List had served in the Army during World War II and the Korean War, utilizing his accounting degree to build a career in banking and insurance while projecting an image of upstanding moral rectitude that masked severe financial troubles, religious fanaticism, and a pathological inability to accept failure or seek help in times of crisis. By the fall of 1971, List was facing imminent financial ruin due to his inability to retain employment, having been fired from his position as vice president and comptroller at First National Bank of New Jersey, and his wife Helen's chronic illness from syphilis contracted from her first husband, which had left her an alcoholic and unable to provide emotional or financial support, creating a situation that List viewed as incompatible with his self-image as a successful Christian patriarch. On that November morning, List began his systematic slaughter by shooting his mother Alma in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast, using his service weapon, a 9mm Steyr automatic pistol, before proceeding to the ballroom where his wife Helen was drinking coffee, shooting her once in the back of the head, and then methodically eliminating his children one by one as they returned home from school, with Patricia arriving first and kneeling as if in prayer before being shot, followed by the younger boys who were killed in their respective bedrooms without apparent struggle. Having eliminated his entire family, List composed a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining that he had killed them to send their souls to heaven before they could be corrupted by the world and his financial failures, placed the bodies on sleeping bags in the ballroom, and disappeared, leaving the utilities running and the mansion's music playing on a continuous loop to create the illusion of occupancy, while he established a new life as Robert Peter Clark, an accountant in Denver, Colorado, and later Richmond, Virginia. The bodies were not discovered until December 7, 1971, nearly a month after the murders, by which time List had already secured employment and begun rebuilding his life, remarrying in 1985 to a woman who knew nothing of his previous identity or the 5 murders he had committed. Capture came on June 1, 1989, when the television program America's Most Wanted aired a detailed forensic sculpture reconstruction of List's predicted appearance at age 63, prompting neighbors in Richmond to recognize their mild-mannered neighbor Robert Clark as the fugitive, leading to his arrest at a routine traffic stop where he admitted his true identity after initial denials. At trial in 1990, the defense argued that List suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service and was not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming he viewed his family as already spiritually dead due to their alleged sinful behaviors and believed murdering them was the only way to save their souls from damnation. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that List's meticulous planning, including researching prison sentences for various crimes, establishing his new identity with forged documents, and redirecting mail to prevent discovery, indicated clear sanity and premeditation, leading the jury to convict him on 5 counts of first-degree murder after less than 3 hours of deliberation. The judge imposed 5 consecutive life terms, ensuring List would die in prison, which he did on March 21, 2008, at age 82, having spent 18 years incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, where he became a model prisoner known for conducting Bible studies but never expressing genuine remorse for the murders he committed to preserve his twisted vision of familial perfection. The List case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches long-term fugitive investigations, demonstrating the power of forensic age progression and media publicity in capturing elderly criminals who believe they have successfully escaped their past. While the mansion where the murders occurred, known as the Breeze Knoll, burned down in a suspicious fire in 1972 and was replaced by a new residence, though the property remains infamous as the site of one of the most calculated domestic massacres in criminal history. Number 5. Arthur Williams, the geriatric domestic killer. Arthur Williams was 81 years old when he fatally stabbed his 81-year-old wife Edna in their Riviera Beach, Florida home on April 14, 2019. A crime that shocked the tight-knit senior community where they had resided for 3 decades and challenged assumptions about the peaceful nature of elderly marriages, revealing instead the toxic undercurrents of resentment and violence that can persist and even intensify as couples age beyond their 8th decades. The Williamses had appeared to neighbors and family members as a typical elderly couple enjoying their golden years, attending church regularly at the First Baptist Church of Riviera Beach and participating in community activities. Though behind closed doors their relationship had deteriorated into a cycle of verbal abuse and physical threats, particularly as Arthur's health declined and he became increasingly dependent on Edna for daily care, a situation that reportedly embittered him and led to frequent arguments regarding his medication, their finances, and his refusal to allow outside help into their home. On the morning of the murder, following an argument about Edna's plan to temporarily place Arthur in a respite care facility so she could visit their daughter in Georgia, Williams retrieved a kitchen knife with a 6-inch blade and attacked his wife in their bedroom, stabbing her 17 times in the chest, neck, and abdomen with such force that the blade nicked her spine, before attempting suicide by slashing his own wrists but failing to inflict fatal injuries due to blood clotting and arthritis that prevented deep cuts. The crime was discovered when the couple's daughter, concerned that her mother had not answered her phone for 24 hours, requested a welfare check from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, where deputies found Arthur sitting in the living room covered in blood and Edna's body in the master bedroom, with Williams immediately confessing to the murder and expressing frustration that his suicide attempt had failed, stating he had killed his wife because he could not bear the thought of being placed in a nursing home against his will. During the investigation, detectives learned that Edna had contacted Adult Protective Services 6 months prior to express concerns about Arthur's increasingly aggressive behavior and her fear that he might harm her. Though caseworkers determined that the situation did not meet the threshold for emergency intervention and had scheduled a follow-up visit that occurred just 3 days before the murder, finding no immediate danger despite Edna's expressed anxieties. At trial, which began in February 2020, prosecutors presented evidence of the 17 separate stab wounds and Arthur's detailed confession as proof of premeditation and malice aforethought, rejecting defense arguments that the crime was committed in a moment of extreme emotional disturbance brought on by fear of institutionalization and age-related cognitive decline affecting his impulse control. Medical experts testified that Arthur Williams displayed signs of vascular dementia and depression, but retained sufficient capacity to understand the nature of his actions and the wrongfulness of killing his wife, while character witnesses described him as a controlling and jealous husband who had threatened Edna on multiple previous occasions, including once holding a gun to her head during an argument in 2015 that had never been reported to police. The jury, composed primarily of middle-aged and elderly jurors who expressed sympathy for the challenges of aging, but maintained that violence was never an acceptable solution, convicted Williams of second-degree murder on March 3, 2020, with the judge sentencing him to 25 years to life in prison, acknowledging his age but noting the savagery of the 17 stab wounds warranted significant punishment regardless of the defendant's advanced years. Williams was transported to the South Florida Reception Center and later assigned to the Graceville Correctional Facility's geriatric unit, where he remains incarcerated, the case serving as a tragic illustration of how the intersection of aging, loss of independence, and long-term marital dysfunction can create lethal situations, while prompting reforms in Florida's Elder Protective Services regarding the assessment of homicide risk in domestic situations involving cognitively declining but physically capable seniors. Number 6. Carlton Jones, the septuagenarian neighbor killer. Carlton Jones was 76 years old when he shot and killed his 61-year-old neighbor Isaac Sims in the Chatham neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on June 3, 2019. Culminating a 10-year feud over property lines and noise complaints that exemplified how elderly individuals can become entrenched in seemingly minor disputes that escalate through obsession and isolation into deadly violence. Jones, a retired steelworker and widower who lived alone in the home he had owned for 40 years, had developed an intense hatred for Sims, a younger man who purchased the adjacent property in 2009 and made improvements including a new driveway that Jones believed encroached on his land by mere inches, sparking a years-long conflict that involved dozens of calls to police, civil lawsuits, and mutual restraining orders, though never resulting in physical violence until Jones decided to resolve the matter permanently. On the morning of the shooting, Sims was in his front yard performing routine maintenance when Jones emerged from his home carrying a .380 caliber handgun he had purchased legally 6 months prior despite his age, crossed onto Sims's property, and fired 3 shots at close range, striking Sims in the chest and head and killing him instantly before Jones returned to his porch to await police, reportedly telling the first responding officer that he was tired of the younger man disrespecting him, and that the killing was necessary to protect his property rights. The investigation revealed that Jones had meticulously planned the murder for several months, researching stand-your-ground laws and consulting with an attorney about property rights, though he had never filed a formal complaint regarding the driveway on the morning of the shooting, instead choosing immediate lethal confrontation over any attempt at legal resolution or mediation. During the trial proceedings in early 2020, prosecutors presented evidence from Jones's computer showing searches for How to Kill Neighbor Legally and Stand Your Ground Pennsylvania, as well as testimony from other neighbors who described Jones as increasingly paranoid and aggressive in his later years, frequently shouting at passers-by and threatening violence against anyone he perceived as trespassing on his property, including children retrieving balls from his yard. The defense argued that Jones suffered from dementia and delusional disorder, presenting medical records indicating he had been diagnosed with age-related cognitive decline and personality changes that impaired his ability to control impulses or appreciate the criminality of his actions. Though court-appointed psychiatrists determined that while Jones displayed mild cognitive impairment, he retained sufficient capacity to understand that shooting his neighbor was wrong and was capable of assisting in his own defense. On February 14, 2020, the jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted Jones of first-degree murder and possession of an instrument of crime, with Judge Anthony Mariani imposing a sentence of life in prison without parole, stating that the premeditation evident in Jones's research and weapon purchase outweighed any mitigating factors related to his age or cognitive status. Jones was incarcerated at State Correctional Institution Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania, where he remains in the geriatric population, his case frequently cited in discussions about elder law and property disputes, while the Chatham community has worked to establish mediation services for long-term neighbor conflicts to prevent similar tragedies, recognizing that the combination of fixed income, homeownership, and cognitive decline in aging populations can create volatile situations where minor grievances become deadly obsessions. Number 7. Albert Flick, the recidivist geriatric murderer. Albert Flick stands as one of the most disturbing examples of systemic failure in the American criminal justice system regarding elderly violent offenders. Having been released from prison in 2004 after serving 25 years for the 1979 brutal stabbing murder of his wife Sandra in front of their young daughter, only to kill again at the age of 77 in 2018 in Lewiston, Maine, demonstrating that age does not diminish violent tendencies and that early release of murderers based on age predictions can have fatal consequences for communities. Born in 1940, Flick had established a pattern of domestic violence throughout his first marriage, culminating in Sandra's murder when he stabbed her 14 times with a knife while their 12-year-old daughter watched, earning him a sentence of 30 years with good time credit, allowing early release despite psychiatric evaluations at the time describing him as having poor impulse control and violent tendencies toward women that were unlikely to diminish with age. After his release, Fitch moved to Auburn, Maine, where he lived quietly for several years before beginning a harassment campaign against Kimberly Dobby, a 48-year-old mother of two who lived in the same apartment complex, developing an obsessive attachment to her that she repeatedly rejected, leading Flick to stalk her, send unwanted gifts, and threaten male friends she associated with, behavior that resulted in multiple police reports but no charges that would have violated his parole or triggered reincarceration. On July 15, 2018, after watching Dobby have coffee with a male friend at a nearby laundromat, Flick retrieved 2 knives from his apartment, entered the laundromat, and attacked Dobby in front of her 11-year-old twin sons, stabbing her 11 times in the neck and back with such force that one blade bent from impact with bone, killing her before the horrified children while Flick remained at the scene to be arrested without resistance, reportedly stating that he knew he would be returning to prison and was glad he had finished the job. The trial focused heavily on whether the justice system had failed by releasing Flick in 2004 despite his age at that time being 64 and predictable violent recidivism, with prosecutors presenting evidence that Flick had told a friend weeks before the murder that he would rather kill Dobby than see her with other men, and that at 77 he possessed the physical strength to commit such a violent act, undermining defense arguments that his age made him harmless and that the crime was an isolated incident of passion rather than a continuation of lifelong violent patterns. On August 9, 2019, the jury convicted Flick of murder after only 45 minutes of deliberation, and Justice Mary Gay Kennedy sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, explicitly stating that she was imposing the maximum sentence to ensure he would never again be released to harm another woman, noting the chilling similarity between Sandra Flick's murder 4 decades prior and Kimberly Dobbie's killing, both involving jealous rage, multiple stab wounds, and the presence of children as witnesses. Flick was transported to Maine State Prison in Warren, where at age 84 he remains in the general population despite his advanced age. His case prompting significant reforms in Maine's sentencing guidelines regarding elderly violent offenders and the elimination of good time credit for murder convictions, while advocates for domestic violence victims have cited his case extensively in arguing against early release for convicted wife killers regardless of age, emphasizing that the entitlement and jealousy that drive such murders do not dissipate with time, but rather can intensify as elderly men face declining power and relevance in their lives. Number 8. Thomas Lynch, the landlord slayer. Thomas Kenneth Lynch was 77 years old when he shot and killed his 62-year-old tenant John Picard in the Sacramento, California duplex they shared on September 3, 2015. A crime that originated in a mundane landlord-tenant dispute over unpaid rent, but escalated through Lynch's isolation, paranoia, and refusal to accept the legal eviction process, culminating in a murder that highlighted the dangers of allowing elderly property owners with cognitive decline to manage rental units without oversight or support. Lynch, a retired postal worker who had purchased the duplex in 1987 as a retirement investment, had become increasingly erratic in his management of the property in the years leading up to the shooting, frequently changing locks without notice, shutting off utilities, and making threatening statements to tenants he viewed as problematic, behaviors that family members later admitted they had noticed but dismissed as the quirks of a stubborn old man rather than warning signs of violent capability. Picard, a disabled veteran living on fixed Social Security income, had fallen 3 months behind on rent after an unexpected medical expense, prompting Lynch to file eviction proceedings but growing increasingly agitated by the slow pace of the legal process and Picard's continued presence in the unit, with neighbors reporting that Lynch had been heard shouting that he would solve the problem himself, rather than wait for the court system. On the morning of the shooting, Lynch confronted Picard in the shared driveway, brandishing a .357 Magnum revolver he kept for protection, and when Picard attempted to retreat into his unit while calling 911, Lynch fired 3 shots, striking him twice in the back and once in the head, killing him instantly before sitting on his porch to await police, telling the first responders that he had taken out the trash and was ready to go to jail. The investigation revealed that Lynch had made detailed notes in a journal regarding his plans to kill Picard, including calculations of the most effective shooting angles and statements indicating he believed he was too old to be seriously punished for the crime, viewing his advanced age as a shield against significant incarceration, a perception that prosecutors were determined to disprove during the subsequent legal proceedings. At trial in 2017, the defense argued that Lynch suffered from Alzheimer's disease and delusional disorder, presenting testimony from his personal physician who had noted memory loss and paranoid ideation in recent years, though court-appointed experts determined that while Lynch displayed mild cognitive impairment, he retained sufficient capacity to understand the wrongfulness of his actions and was capable of forming the specific intent required for first-degree murder. The prosecution emphasized Lynch's journal entries and his statement to police about expecting leniency due to his age as evidence of clear premeditation and awareness, arguing that his decision to shoot Picard in the back as he fled demonstrated execution-style malice rather than a momentary loss of control. The jury convicted Lynch of first-degree murder and enhancements for using a firearm, with the judge sentencing him to 50 years to life in prison, stating explicitly that age would not be a mitigating factor in this case due to the calculated nature of the killing and the vulnerability of the victim. Lynch, now in his mid-80s, is incarcerated at California Healthcare Facility in Stockton, which specializes in geriatric inmate care, his case having prompted California legislation requiring property management training for elderly landlords showing signs of cognitive decline and establishing protocols for adult protective services intervention in landlord-tenant disputes involving seniors, recognizing that the combination of property ownership stress and age-related mental health issues can create lethal situations when left unaddressed by family or social services. Number 9. James Crummel, the serial predator who died on death row. James Michael Crummel was 79 years old when he died of natural causes on California's death row at San Quentin State Prison on March 30, 2012. Having spent the final 16 years of his life awaiting execution for the 1977 kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of 13-year-old Jamie Trotter, though investigators believed he was responsible for at least 2 other child murders spanning 3 decades, making him one of the oldest confirmed serial predators in American criminal history when finally brought to justice at age 63 in 1997. Born in 1934, Crummel had compiled a lengthy criminal record including multiple convictions for child molestation beginning in the 1960s, serving prison terms in Wisconsin and Arizona before settling in Orange County, California, where he worked as an electrician and maintained a facade of normalcy while harboring violent sexual compulsions directed at adolescent boys that he managed to conceal from neighbors and employers, despite multiple convictions that should have flagged him as a high-risk offender. On November 2, 1977, Crummel abducted Jamie Trotter from a school bus stop in Costa Mesa, sexually assaulting him over several hours before strangling him and disposing of his remains in a remote canyon area, where the body was not discovered until 1990, though by that time Crummel had already been convicted of an attempted kidnapping of another boy in Arizona in 1982, serving 5 years before returning to California where he continued to offend. The case broke in 1997 when Crummel's former roommate, who had witnessed Crummel watching a videotape of the Trotter murder, finally came forward to authorities after years of guilt, providing information that allowed detectives to link Crummel to the cold case through forensic evidence and witness testimony, leading to his arrest at his apartment in Costa Mesa, where he had been living for a decade within blocks of an elementary school. At trial in 2004, prosecutors presented testimony from 2 other men who claimed Crummel had abducted and molested them as children in the 1970s and 1980s, establishing a pattern of predatory behavior, as well as forensic evidence linking Crummel to Trotter's remains, while the defense argued that Crummel was too old to pose a threat and that the case relied heavily on the testimony of a witness with credibility issues, though the jury convicted him of first-degree murder with special circumstances for kidnapping and lewd conduct after 8 days of deliberation. During the penalty phase, the jury declined to recommend death row, but the judge overrode their recommendation and imposed the death sentence, stating that Crummel's pattern of preying on children and the particular vulnerability of the 13-year-old victim warranted the ultimate punishment regardless of the defendant's age at the time of conviction. While awaiting execution, Crummel exhausted all appeals, with the California Supreme Court affirming his conviction and sentence in 2008, though he died of natural causes related to heart disease and diabetes before the state could carry out the sentence, leaving the families of his other suspected victims without closure or judicial confirmation of his guilt in those cases. The Crummel case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches cold cases involving serial offenders, demonstrating that elderly predators can be successfully prosecuted decades after their crimes using advances in forensic psychology and witness corroboration, while his death on death row sparked ongoing debates regarding the cost and ethics of capital punishment for elderly inmates who die of natural causes before execution, with victim advocates arguing that the sentence served its purpose by ensuring Crummel never again breathed free air despite his advanced age at capture. Number 10. Pete Jackson, the cryptocurrency killer. Pete Jackson was 67 years old when he bludgeoned his 65-year-old wife Brenda to death in their Palm Beach Gardens, Florida home on March 22, 2021, a crime that shocked the affluent retirement community where they had lived for 20 years and revealed the devastating impact of financial fraud and cryptocurrency scams on elderly couples, as Jackson's murderous rage was sparked by his discovery that his wife had invested their life savings in fraudulent cryptocurrency schemes that left them destitute. Jackson, a retired insurance executive, and Brenda, a former schoolteacher, had appeared to live comfortably on their combined pensions and investments. Though unbeknownst to Peter, Brenda had become involved with online scammers who convinced her to invest over $800,000 in various cryptocurrency platforms over an 18-month period, depleting their retirement accounts and home equity line of credit before Peter discovered the missing funds while preparing their taxes in March 2021. Confronting Brenda about the missing money, Peter flew into a rage that neighbors described as uncharacteristic of the normally soft-spoken retiree. Retrieving a baseball bat from the garage and striking his wife repeatedly in the head and torso, fracturing her skull and multiple ribs before strangling her with an extension cord to ensure she was dead, then attempting to stage the scene as a robbery before calling 911 and claiming intruders had attacked his wife. A story that quickly unraveled. Under questioning by Palm Beach County Sheriff's detectives, the investigation revealed that Peter had discovered the financial fraud 3 days prior to the murder and had spent that time drinking heavily and researching violent crimes of passion, while also discovering that he had recently increased the life insurance policy on Brenda, though he denied these were premeditated acts and insisted he had snapped upon learning they had lost everything they had worked for over 40 years of marriage. During trial proceedings in early 2022, the defense argued for a conviction of manslaughter based on extreme emotional disturbance, presenting evidence of the sophisticated cryptocurrency fraud that had victimized Brenda and the legitimate devastation Peter felt at losing their financial security. While experts testified that the isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic had exacerbated existing anxiety and depression in both individuals, creating a pressure cooker environment that led to the fatal confrontation. However, prosecutors successfully argued that the use of multiple weapons, first the bat, then the cord, indicated a cooling of blood and clear intent to kill rather than a spontaneous act of passion, and that Peter's attempts to stage the scene demonstrated awareness of wrongdoing, while the life insurance increase suggested financial motive beyond mere rage at the fraud. The jury convicted Peter of second-degree murder on May 17, 2022, with the judge sentencing him to 40 years in prison, acknowledging his previous law-abiding life and the genuine victimization by scammers, but stating that murder was never an acceptable response to financial loss regardless of the defendant's age or the fraudulent conduct of the victim. Peter Jackson, now 70, is incarcerated at Charlotte Correctional Institution in Florida. His case serving as a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of elderly individuals to cryptocurrency fraud and the devastating interpersonal consequences when financial crimes destroy lifetime savings, while also highlighting that the desperation of financial ruin in retirement can drive even previously stable seniors to commit acts of extreme violence against those they perceive as responsible for their destitution.